Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know you're super excited to learn about the verbal GMAT strategies, as well as hear more about how the exam is changing and what you might actually need to do really well on the test. So congratulations on finding the time to come here. I see that most of you are just starting, but we have a fair number of people who have already been studying a while, and we have people from all over the world today: Canada, United States, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia. So good morning or good evening or good night to you. Thanks so much for sharing where you stand right now. Today we'll talk about the verbal strategies specifically. We will have a separate class for quant, but we will be addressing a lot of things overall related to how to study for the test. I'll give you some tips and strategies and tricks. We'll talk about different resources, but I wanted to begin just to help us get started with actually taking a look at a real GMAT verbal question. So let me show you a question. And I'm going to ask you to read it for about 30 seconds or so, 30 to 45 seconds. Let me know when you're done. I just want to keep this interactive. So just please throw things in the chat box when you are done reading this question. Just say yes or thumbs up. Okay, perfect. I see some yeses in the chat box. By the way, when you put something in the chat box, I do see it. It's just that because of normally we have a lot of people in this class, and also we have people from everywhere. So I see your comments, but if you don't see each other's comments, that's okay. Sometimes people post some weird things. So okay, perfect. Oh, everybody's done. So fairly easy to understand question, right? How hard do you think is this question? Just let me know in the chat box. Easy, medium, hard. What do you think? Yeah, easy. Okay, yeah, most of you are saying easy. Okay, that sounds great. So now that you've read it, you've understood this, it's pretty straightforward. Let me show you the answer choices. And I'm actually going to launch a quick poll just so that I could see how you're responding. And when I see that most of you have responded, we're actually going to talk about this question. So I'm going to give you about 45 seconds or so. Here are the answer choices, and please let me know in this quick poll that just popped up on your screen. All right, it's been about a minute, and I've noticed that many people still haven't picked an answer. So just pick the answer that looks the best to you. It doesn't really matter if you get this right. We're here to learn. This is not a real test, so it's okay to make mistakes here. Please let me know. I'm just going to give you another 10 seconds. All right, let me go ahead and stop the poll right now and talk about this question. Now, the question, when you read it, is fairly straightforward, right? So simply two people are discussing a certain issue. Sasha is saying something. Essentially, she is making a claim. She's supporting her claim by providing some pieces of evidence. And Jamal is saying, wait a second, that doesn't really always happen. And he's saying, yeah, maybe that was true in the past, but it's not really true about people today because they're not as physically active. So it was pretty straightforward. And you might be surprised to learn this question is actually classified as a difficult question by the GMAT. That means that there are not too many people that get it right. And you can kind of probably start getting to get an understanding of why when you read the answer choices. Because the answer choices don't really talk about human evolution. Most of them certainly don't. And many people, when they read the passage, they think that they really need to understand the human evolution. But that's not what the GMAT's about. In fact, here are the words that would be a lot more important to understand. There are words such as refuting or qualifying or supporting, broadening, words such as assumption or conclusion or expressing doubts. So that's much more important because the question was not what he's saying, but what is he doing? Essentially, how is he responding? How is he arguing? How is he structuring his response in such a way that his points will be supported? So let's take a look at these and let's try to start making sense of these keywords. A says, refuting her statement about our prehistoric ancestors. So essentially, he's saying whatever she said about prehistoric ancestors isn't really true. Did he ever actually say this? I don't remember him saying this. He said people today are not as physically active, so maybe they shouldn't eat so much meat. But he didn't really refute anything about prehistoric ancestors, so that certainly gets rid of A. B talks about qualifying the conclusion, and C talks about supporting it, broadening it. Now, you would be forgiven to not know what does the word qualify mean. I would be the first person to say that I don't really use this word every day in my spoken language, and I certainly don't often use the word broaden somebody's conclusion. So let's leave B and C for now. They're a little bit harder to understand. Let's take a look at D. So in D, Jamal's question whether her assumption about our ancestors permits any conclusions about human evolution. Did he ever actually say that she had some wrong assumptions? And did he actually ever doubt her conclusions about the human evolution? That's not really what he said, right? He didn't talk about human evolution. He just said, look, people today are not as physically active as before. So that certainly would also get rid of D. He wasn't questioning her assumptions about ancestors or conclusions about the evolution. E says, expressing doubts about whether most human beings today are as healthy as our prehistoric ancestors were. And this is actually the most popular answer. And it's easy to see how we would pick E, even though E, unfortunately, is not the correct answer. But see, he did say that human beings today are not as physically active as our ancestors were. Sorry, yeah, as our ancestors were. But when we're talking about being physically active, is that the same thing as being healthy? Well, could be, but depends on what we're comparing. If we're comparing people who live today, who are physically active, with other people who live today who are not physically active, then we can probably say that, yes, people who are physically active are generally more healthy. But remember, this wasn't the comparison he was making. He was making the comparison with people today with people who lived tens of thousands of years ago. And people today are a lot more healthy than people then. I mean, just think about the life expectancy. People today mostly live to, an average life expectancy is in the 70s and 80s, but people many, many years ago were lucky to live to 30. Even a couple hundred years ago, the average life expectancy was about 40 years old in even in the early 20th century. So certainly that's not a fair comparison, but this is where we essentially make our own assumption. We bring in our own knowledge into the question, and that's what the GMAT is using against us. We need to be very clear to use the information that's given to us in the question and not any outside information. So E wouldn't be the correct answer. Being physically active is not the same as being healthy. Now this leaves us with B and C. And interestingly enough, once we eliminate these three answer choices, the two remaining answers are actually the polar opposites of each other. This won't always be the case, but there will be quite a fair number of questions where there's a correct answer and there's a wrong answer that actually does something that's relevant, but the opposite. So what does C do? C supports and broadens it, and B qualifies, which means narrows it down, redefines it, basically says, look, I said something, but what I really meant is it doesn't always apply. It applies in just some cases, right? So when somebody says, let me just qualify this, they might say, people in Canada love cold weather. And then they'll say, well, actually, let me qualify this. Only people who are born in Canada love cold weather, and maybe just some people love cold weather, right? So that means qualify, whereas support and broaden just mean, look, it's not just Canada, only broaden the definition. We love all kinds of weather. So what did Jamal do here? Well, he said, look, whatever you say doesn't always apply, right? So let's just redefine this. Let's narrow it down. I just say in some cases, maybe it does apply, but it doesn't always apply. And that's why B is the correct answer. So if you got B, congratulations. If you didn't get B, congratulations, then you just learned something. And one of the interesting things that I've learned when I looked at this question is this is actually classified, like we mentioned, as a difficult question because of, again, somewhat confusing answer choices. So you might wonder, oh, okay, well, so if I see something like this on the GMAT that's not really related to any business or anything like that, I'm trying to get into a business school, so why do I need to know about human diet? Then the question is, what really separates people who get very high scores from people who don't? And that brings us back to a more fundamental understanding of the GMAT. And here at Admit Master, when you come to a class, we actually teach you to understand the GMAT on a deeper level. Very often when we show you the strategy, we actually explain why and how this strategy works. And sometimes you will even forget maybe the exact steps to the strategy, but because you have a deeper understanding of how the GMAT works, you'll be able to deal with these questions nevertheless. So let me show you a quote from the GMAT, the organization that actually makes the test. This quote is published in MBA.com, and you can also see it in the official guide. And it was actually shared with us at one of the GMAT conferences. So we, as a test prep organization, belong to a very small group of companies that actually get invited by the GMAT to go to visit GMAT at the headquarters. We just been there a couple of weeks ago for our most recent summit, where there's only about 6 or 7 companies from across North America that come, and we have some discussions with the GMAT. We share some ideas. We learn new things about the GMAT. I just had a follow-up meeting this morning with a person from the GMAT. So we stay pretty close to the GMAT and all of the development, and we usually learn about things that are changing first. So this is a very interesting quote, and most people are actually missing this quote when they read the book. And I'll show you why and show you some insights into this. But essentially, if there's only one thing that you can take away from this class is that I want you to take this away, that this is not a normal test. Most of the normal tests, most of the regular tests are knowledge-based tests. So they evaluate how well you know a certain subject matter. For example, if you want to do a test in history or let's say project management or risk management, then you would generally need to know that subject matter. And for the GMAT, however, you don't need to know any subject matter. You need to have some basic understanding of elementary level math and English, really from elementary school, not even from high school. So what's the GMAT really about? Well, the GMAT is what's called a psychometric test. It's a test that essentially evaluates how your mind works, how your brain works. It's not an aptitude test. It's not an IQ test. It's not a knowledge test or a subject matter test. It is really what it is. It's a psychometric test. It essentially evaluates your behavior. It evaluates how well you react in certain situations. And the questions are designed to get you to do certain things, to sometimes slow down, sometimes make mistakes, sometimes doubt your own judgment. The questions are pretty complicated and sophisticated. And essentially, by asking you a series of questions, the GMAT evaluates how well you can think on a higher level. Because think about this, if you're trying to get into a business school, business schools prepare future leaders. And for the business schools to select people who would actually lead our humanity into the future, they need to make sure that people can think. So this is a test that evaluates that, how people can think. Now, this is very different from most of the tests, like I mentioned, that we've ever done. Most of the tests that we have done, we're evaluating knowledge. And you may even remember this little mantra from our elementary school and high school: knowledge is power. And I certainly remember in my school, many teachers were telling me, I remember my history teacher was saying, well, sir, you remember, knowledge is power. And if you remember that stuff, you're going to be powerful when you grow up. Look where it got us. Now we have Google and we have ChatGPT and everything else that can give us instant answers. So it's not really that important to know things. It's important to be able to do things. It's important to be able to recognize, understand, act on, and ultimately use the skills to make rational decisions. That's what leaders do. So I'm going to use some analogies all throughout our class today. And one of the analogies that I will be using later on is the analogy of driving a car. If you want to drive a car, let's say you want to drive a high performance car. Let's say go on a racetrack and drive a Lamborghini a couple 100 miles an hour. Well, I'm sure you can probably understand that it's not going to be enough to just read the book on driving. We need the skills. Skills take time. You can also think of the GMAT as a sport. It's just a sport for your brain. Studying for the GMAT is just like going to the gym. And that's why when you came here today, I'm really grateful that you made the time. You could think of this as you took your brain to the gym today. I'm sure you also know that taking yourself to the gym once is probably not going to be enough. So you will need to invest some time into studying, and we'll talk about that. And I'll tell you about different resources you could use. Now, many of you wonder, well, how is the GMAT changing? I've heard that the GMAT is changing. So let me show you a bit about that, because that was going to provide a context once we start talking about the different types of questions. And I promise, since you came here to the verbal refresher class, I will definitely share with you the strategies for all three verbal question types. That's really the main objective today. I also wanted to make sure that you walk away not just with the information, but with a deeper understanding, and most importantly, with an action plan. If you take a look at the current exam format, this is the exam format that has been around for approximately 10 years, since 2012. You will see 4 different sections: analytical writing assessment, integrated reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and verbal reasoning. I think you would start noticing some patterns right here. Patterns are reasoning and analytical. This is what's tested on the GMAT. Many people, when I do one-on-one consultations, I would often ask people, well, tell me, what kinds of questions, what kind of sections are there in the GMAT? And very often I would hear, I know there's math I'm really scared about, and I know there's English, with which I should be okay, or the other way around. And then if you look at the structure of the test online, you would notice, there's no word math and there's no word English. It's really all about reasoning. So in the current version of the test, and we'll talk about the timeline when this is going to be changing. And certainly if you have any questions, please throw them in a Q&A box. The current version of the test has these 4 sections, but only the last 2, quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning, contribute towards your total score, 200 to 800. The other 2 sections do not. They're still being evaluated. You're still going to get the score. The score is still going to be sent to the business schools, but only sections 3 and 4 contribute towards the total score. And these 2 sections, for the score to be properly evaluated within about 3 hours, what the exam does is uses what's called the computer adaptive algorithm. Essentially how this works is that the GMAT doesn't just give you a bunch of easy, a bunch of medium, and a bunch of hard questions. This is how most of the traditional tests work. And that's why most of the traditional tests are much longer. Sometimes they are a day or 2, or maybe 4 hours, and sometimes they're a little bit less accurate. What the GMAT will do is they will keep track of how you're answering questions. It knows the difficulty of each of the questions. And based on how you respond to earlier questions, it's going to pick future questions. And it's going to keep varying this difficulty based on all of the previous responses. And eventually, by giving you enough of the questions at the level you're comfortable with, either easy, medium, or hard, and by adapting this level as you go along, the GMAT will have a pretty accurate assessment of where you stand within maybe only about 30 questions per section. So that's the current version of the test. The new test is going to be similar in many degrees, but it's also going to be different in many other degrees. So let's talk about how is the GMAT changing. First of all, the exam is getting shorter. Many people are just saying, 3 hours is a little bit too long. I'd like to do an exam that's less in my time commitment. So the exam is going to be 2 hours and 15 minutes, 1 10-minute break, and there's a bit of time to sign in. So about 2.5 hours and you'll be out of the test center or out of your online test experience. There's now going to be only 3 sections instead of 4. You will have quantitative reasoning, verbal reasoning, and the new section that's called data insights, which is essentially the old integrated reasoning section that got more questions added up, and the questions that were added up were data sufficiency questions. So in the old exam, you had 2 question types in quantitative reasoning. They were problem solving and data sufficiency. In the new exam, you are going to, in fact, let me show this to you. So in the current version of the test, you have problem solving and data sufficiency. And in the verbal reasoning section, you have sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. We are talking about the verbal today. We're going to be talking about quantitative reasoning and 2 question types on July 19th. However, data sufficiency questions are going to be moved from quantitative reasoning to data insights. The data insights section will now become adaptive. You're going to have a little bit less time per question compared to what you had in integrated reasoning. In the verbal section, the sentence correction questions are going to be removed. So the new version of the exam is going to have only critical reasoning and reading comprehension. So on average, a little bit less time per question, just because sentence correction questions typically take a little bit less time. The essay is going to be removed because there will be other ways for the schools to assess your skills. Many of the schools would use timed essays provided by Kira Talent, which are part of your video interview. And of course, you will have to submit your application essays as well. And geometry will also be removed. If you go on mba.com, you will be able to see the difference. There's a different scoring scale. The new scores are going to have a 5 at the end. So the scores are no longer going to be 200 to 800. They're going to be 205 to 805. There's a bit of flexibility built into the new exam. You will be able to go back and review the answers, the responses that you've made, and you can do that only at the end of the test. So you have to continue moving forward. But if you finish your section and you have a bit of time left, you can go back and review any of the responses that you've done. You can flag them to make it easier for you to find. and you can change up to 3 responses when you go back. There's a bit of procedural change as well. The pricing is going to remain the same. It's approximately $300 US for the exam, depending on which country you're in. It might be slightly more or slightly less. Now, one important thing also, on top of all of that, is that the exam is also getting an updated score scale. What this means for us is that many years ago, when the GMAT adaptive scale was introduced, the score of 700 was the top 1%. Now it's the top 13%. So going forward, and I'll talk about the timeline in a moment. Thank you, Miriam. It's coming in the next slide. The score of 700 or 705 now is going to be the top 1%. So it's going to be very difficult to get a score above 700. Essentially, you can think of the new 700, the new 705 is like the old 760. So going forward, it's going to be very hard to get a score of 700. There'll be a bit of a process of adjustment when people are going to recognize that a score of 640 or 630 is actually an excellent score. But there's going to be this little bit of this psychological adjustment. Even though there will be these conversion charts, if you really do want that 700 score, you probably do want to take the test before it is changing. There's some other reasons why you might want to do that. One of the reasons is generally sentence correction for most people takes a bit less time. And also the fact that the integrated reasoning section is now non-adaptive. So it's a lot easier to deal with this section because half of the questions are easy. There might be another reason. Going forward, the new integrated reasoning, now called the data insights score, is now also going to become part of the total score. So overall, at least initially, it's going to be a lot harder to get these higher scores. Now, when is this going to happen? The official prep is available right now. You can go on Amazon and or your favorite bookstore or on MBA.com and buy these books. We do get these books from a publisher, usually about a week before they were released. So we got them at the end of May. And we already have made some adjustments to our course. So in our courses now, we teach both versions of the exams. Essentially, there's a big overlap in the questions. Most of the questions are the same. The new version of the exam doesn't contain some questions, and it has a new type of questions that is still going to be very rare on the exam. They're going to be slowly introduced. So when you start taking the new GMAT focus, you're only going to see about 1 or 2 questions that are completely new. And these are the questions that are called non-mass data sufficiency questions. Essentially, the data sufficiency questions that don't contain any numbers. That's a bit strange, and this is something that we are going to prepare you for going forward. But if you take our course right now, you will be prepared for either of the tests. The registration will open on August 29th, 2023, and you can actually start taking the new exam in Q4 2023. The old exam is going to be available until sometimes in Q1 2023. So the overlap between the old exam and the new exam is actually going to be very short. We thought it will be at least 3 to 6 months, but according to the GMAT, it's actually going to be just a few weeks. They're just hoping to iron out some kinks. So what this means that if you are planning to apply to an MBA program with a start date of 2024, you should probably try to take the current version of the test. Again, there's going to be a bit of a process of adjustment, and some of the business schools, most notably Harvard Business School, said that they will not be accepting the new version of the GMAT for the 2024 start date. If you are planning to start your MBA program in 2025 or later, you could either do the current version of the test or wait and you do the new version of the test. Well, let me tell you from my own experience, I've been teaching the GMAT for about 14 years, and I've seen some changes happening to the GMAT. I've taken my own test 20 years ago, and we have instructors who've been teaching for over 25 years. The GMAT and pretty much all of the test makers are not really known for making the tests easier. They generally, as the tests evolve, they make them harder and harder because people learn how to beat the tests. So you might want to try to do this test while a lot is known about it, while it's still, the algorithm is very well known and understood, and while there are some questions that take a bit less time. these questions are going to be removed. And again, the scoring algorithm is now going to favor a higher order logical thinking as well. There are some questions, for example, that many native speakers are really comfortable with, for example, sentence correction questions. And their sentence correction is not that hard. I'm actually going to teach you some strategies today that you'll see that this is really something you can deal with. On the flip side, many people who are non-native speakers, people from some quantitatively oriented countries, especially countries in Southeast Asia, India, and China, and former Soviet Union, are very comfortable with quant. And what the GMAT is doing right now is they're recalibrating the questions to make the math easier, but the logic harder. So going forward, people who are very strong in math, but haven't really learned the logic of the test are actually going to be put at a disadvantage. So many reasons to take the current version of the test. Of course, if you want to do your test and start your MBA much later, you can also wait, in which case you can probably start preparing for the new version of the test sometime in the fall or next year, and then take the new version of the test, maybe sometime next year. Again, remember, the test is valid for 5 years. So the business schools will be accepting the current version of the test for a full 5 years. There's not going to be technically any advantage or disadvantage given to people of old test versus new test, except for the 2024 applications, in which many schools said they will be accepting only the current version of the test. If you have any questions, let me know. Just please throw them in the chat box. But I'd like to go back to talking about the verbal section, since this is why we're here today. And just again, I've been speaking quite a lot. I wanted to ask you to share, please, in a quick poll, why you're here today, or why do you think some other people came today? What's hard about the verbal section? Why is it not as straightforward as we would love? And what are some of the challenges we could face in the verbal reasoning section? Please let me know in the chat or here in the poll. And I see some responses. English is not my first language. Yeah, for me, it was a third language, by the way. My first 2 languages are different. Several answer choices seem right. Yeah, the answer choices seem subjective. That's a very common answer. Because think about this. In quant, 2 plus 2 is always 4, right? And in verbal, there are many different things to say the same thing. So sometimes we can disagree on what's better, right? Well, you know what? Actually, I hope by the end of today's class, and certainly by the end of our course, if you take it, you'll recognize that the verbal section is actually not as subjective as most people think. It's actually a lot more black and white. We just need to know what to look for. And the quant section is actually a lot less black and white than most people think, because very often the math is too hard for us to calculate within 2 minutes. So yeah, 2 plus 2 is 4, but what if you have a much harder question? What if you need to multiply 7-digit integers? Well, I can't really do this in 2 minutes. So I'm gonna have to make some judgment calls. Quant and verbal reasoning sections ultimately test very similar skills, their reasoning skills. So thanks so much for sharing this, and thanks so much for getting a lot for the verbal section out, right? And many of you also mentioned that we have verbal questions about unfamiliar topics. And I certainly will show you some questions today about topics that we know nothing about. The interesting thing is you don't need to know anything about them. Everything you know is in front of us. In fact, I remember I had a student a few weeks ago who was taking astrophysics at the University of Toronto. And there was actually, funny enough, in our workbook, there was a passage about astrophysics. And we have a few passages that are assigned for homework. And normally we don't do that passage in class, but I've decided to do it. And this gentleman got every single question wrong in that passage, even though he is a subject matter expert in astrophysics, and many other people who know nothing about astrophysics got most of the questions right. Because sometimes what we know can interfere with our judgment. So not knowing something about the passage and not knowing anything is actually a good thing. So let's talk about how the GMAT can actually do this to us. I mean, how can they challenge us so much in terms of our understanding of the English language, especially if, according to the GMAT, about 80% of people who take the test right now are non-native speakers. How can they test, for example, sentence correction? And this is, by the way, going away, but I can tell you many non-native speakers who learn the structure of the English language, AKA grammar, would actually do very well in sentence correction. I did exceptionally well in sentence correction. And many of our students do as well. Now, sentence correction is giving you a question, sentence correction question is giving you a sentence and is asking you to essentially to fix it. To pick a version of that sentence that is the best written version. And what they're looking for are actually three things. Number one, grammar, but that's not the only thing. Number two, the meaning of the sentence. Number three, the style of the sentence. Now, this looks much more complicated than it actually is, because let me give you the bad news here. Okay? The bad news, and that's genuine, I'm not joking, that's my genuine belief, is one of the bad news for the GMAT is that this is a test in English. And the reason why I'm saying this is that the English grammar is probably a bit more complex than it should be, because English isn't a pure language. It's essentially a German with a bunch of French and Latin words, which means we do have lots of rules, but we also have lots of exceptions to these rules. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And we also have a bunch of words that mean the same thing, but they're written differently. And we also have a bunch of words that are written the same, but have completely different meanings. So how do we deal with this? Well, the simple answer is that the GMAT will test only a very small number of grammar rules. So even though there are so many things potentially they can test about English, they really will only test a small subset. And let me give you an example of how crazy is the English language. In the English language, we'll have over 500,000 words. An average person will speak about 2,000 to 3,000 words. Shakespeare's dictionary was 16,000 words. That's 500,000 words in English, right? So the GMAT can't really make it too complicated. That's why they picked only about 5 or 10 different grammar rules that they consistently test. I'll teach you 2 of these rules today. Another thing is the meaning. I would often hear that people would say, look, I really need to understand the meaning of the sentence, because that's very important. And in fact, many of the GMAT forums will say, yeah, you really have to invest a lot of time in understanding the meaning. The meaning always comes first. Let me give you my take on this. Very often I would do the questions and I wouldn't necessarily understand the meaning. But if I see a sentence that doesn't make any sense, then I know something going on here with the meaning. To me, that's often what I need. I know the correct answer has to have a clear meaning. If the meaning is clear, then I can understand it. If the meaning is not clear, there's probably a problem or mistake in that sentence. That's really it. That's as far as I usually go with the meaning. It's a very, very small number of questions where you have to dig a little bit deeper. And the same with the style. When we talk about the style, it's essentially a preference. It's a style of expression. For example, it'd be nicer to say, John reads a book than the book is being read by John. Both of these sentences are perfectly fine, just one uses a better style. And again, when it comes to the GMAT prefers certain very specific styles of expression. And if you come to a class, we are going to teach you all of these rules so that when you see, for example, a passive voice versus active voice, and you dealt with all of the other mistakes, then you will know that you should go for the active voice versus passive. You also know that the GMAT very often likes to trick people by giving them a passive voice answer that's correct otherwise, and an active voice answer that has some other mistake. And so you'll know how to be aware of these problems, how to not fall into the GMAT traps. So let's talk about these two very important and very common grammar rules. I'm going to take you back all the way to elementary school. In the English language, a sentence that is describing something, which is what most of the sentences will be on the GMAT, it's a sentence that's in what's called the descriptive mood, will need to contain as a minimum 2 words. Can somebody please tell me in the chat box what roles would these 2 words play? So in the English language, you actually can't have a sentence with just 1 word. You cannot just say a dog. Now, you can in some other languages, but not in English. Yes, so Mariam is saying you need a noun and a verb. Well, let's just be a little bit more specific. You need a subject, which is what or whom the sentence is about, which usually is a noun, but could be something else. Could be a pronoun, for example. And you also need a verb, also known as a predicate. And as long as you have 2 of these is called a clause, and it could actually be a complete sentence. So you could have just 2 words in a sentence. Usually you have more, but you could have just 2. So a subject, which is really a noun or a pronoun, and a predicate, which is usually a verb. And that's what we need as a minimum. Interestingly enough, the GMAT will sometimes give you a sentence that doesn't have a verb. Sometimes the verb becomes a modifier or a participle. You remember we talked about the fact that in the English language, sometimes a certain word can mean different things. For example, a word running. If you say, I am running, you can also say running boy, now it's an adjective. You can also say running is my favorite sport. Now that becomes a noun. So the GMAT likes to play these little games where they're going to turn the verb into something else and hope that you didn't notice. What they also do, they sometimes do that, especially when they like to mix these up with other errors. What they also test quite often is the rule that's called the subject-verb agreement rule. Essentially, what this means is that if you use a certain subject, you should use an appropriate verb. And usually, when we use this in our spoken everyday language, the example that will come immediately to mind is something like, I is studying for the GMAT. We say I am studying, not I is studying. I am is the first person, I is or he is or she is the 3rd person. So we need to make sure that the subject and the verb agree in person. What the GMAT will test, however, is the agreement in number, because everything on the sentence correction is in the 3rd person. So it's always he or she or they or it. So it's agreement in number. Essentially what that means, if you have a singular subject, you need a singular verb. And if you have a plural subject, you need a plural verb. That's really it. Pretty simple. Why don't we practice? I just want to make sure that we keep this interactive and that you actually know how to use these rules. So let me show you 5 different sentences. And I'm going to launch a quick poll here. So you can see a poll that just popped up. When you think you know what the answer is, please choose it in a poll, hit submit. And when most people respond, I'll give you about a minute or so. We'll talk about these 5 and we'll see what is the correct answer for each. I see the answers rolling in. Thanks so much. I'll just give you another 15 seconds and we'll talk about these 5 sentences. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and end the poll. And I'm actually just going to show you real quick here what we've picked. So as you could see, for number one, most people, about 3/4 of the people picked was, and about 1/4 of the people picked where. For number two, everybody picked live. For number three, most of the people picked take, but a small number of people picked takes. For number four, most of the people picked have, and a small number of people picked has. And for number five, slightly over half of the people picked has, and a little bit less than half picked have. So it seems like some of these were a little more challenging than some others. Let's talk about these five sentences. Number one, the crowd was aware cheering the Raptors. Well, let me ask you a question. What is the subject here? Well, it's the crowd. One crowd, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter how many people were cheering the Raptors. By the way, in case you don't know, Raptors is a basketball team from Toronto. That's the only basketball team from Canada that who ever won NHL championship, and it happened in 2019. And there was a crowd of about 2 million people on the streets of Toronto cheering the Raptors. But one crowd. So the answer is indeed was one crowd. If we talked about many crowds, then it would be where. Number two, Amy and Bobby live in Boston. Well, who lives in Boston? According to this sentence, it's Amy and Bobby, two people. Two is more than one. So yes, we need to use live and not lives. Number three, Jason as well as his two friends takes or take. So let me ask you a question. Please let me know in the chat box. What's the subject in number three? If the verb is takes or take, what's the subject? So I see some responses here. Felipe is saying Jason. Some other people are saying Jason. Some other people are saying Jason and two friends. Okay. So let's try to get a bit of an insight as how our brain works. We are trained to process information into something we can easily understand. And one of the things that most of us did as we were reading sentence three, instead of reading Jason as well as his two friends, most of us read Jason and his two friends, right? And in terms of the meaning, that seems like it's the same, but it's actually very different. And that's why we have to be very careful about understanding the structure of the sentence and really picking out different parts of the sentence as we are answering the questions. This is really all about having the proper attention to detail. So the subject in two was Amy and Bobby. When you have the word and, then you have a subject that consists of several parts. We call this a list of subjects, and none of them has any preference. So both Amy and Bobby, not one of them is more or one of them is less. They all kind of equal because they are in the list. Now, when we talk about Jason as well as his two friends, as well as means something different from and, even though we process it usually differently, right? If you remember that famous phrase that, you say one thing, people hear something else, and they remember the third thing, is when we process information, we filter it. So you have to consciously ask yourself a question. What is the subject? And because there's no word and, we are not dealing with multiple subjects. We're dealing with just one subject. So what was the subject here? The subject was Jason. And it wasn't two friends. Again, if you're hesitating about whether it's Jason or two friends, then just try to remove the subject from the sentence and see if it will make sense. Well, if we think this Jason is the subject, we'll remove as well as his two friends, and the sentence will simply become Jason takes a GMAT prep course. And that makes sense. But if you remove Jason, then the sentence will read as well as his two friends take a GMAT prep course. And that does not make sense. That would not be a complete sentence. So for that reason, Jason was the subject, and the answer is Jason takes a GMAT prep course. Whew, wow. Okay, that was new. Let's take a look at number four. Neither her brothers nor Susan. Most people here picked have, an overwhelming majority of people picked have. However, the answer is, ladies and gentlemen, has. It is also has. And here's the question. Who has ever been to China? And we might argue none of them, right? So is none of them plural or singular? Well, because this is a little confusing, we will use the rule, what we call the or rule, which is essentially when we have subjects, but it's not all of them anymore. It's just some of them. Going back to our example number 2, it would be something like Amy or Bobby. And when you talk about Amy or Bobby, then you have 2 people, and it's either one or the other. And in that particular case, because it's Amy or Bobby, but it's either Amy or Bobby, will actually use lives. So the proper usage will be Amy or Bobby lives in Boston. That's not how we speak, but that is proper grammar. This is a bit more complicated when we're dealing with 2 subjects that combined with an or neither nor or either or, doesn't really matter. The structure is the same, where one of them is plural, one of them is singular. Brothers is plural, Susan is singular. What we will need to do in this case is use the subject that is the closest to the verb. So ladies and gentlemen, you might want to write this down anytime you're dealing with or in a subject. So there's a list of subjects separated with or. You will need to identify the subject that's physically located closest in the sentence to the verb, and you're going to need to match the number of the verb to the number of that subject. In this case, Susan was closer, so it would be has. Very strange rule, because if we were to say neither Susan nor her brothers, we'll actually say have ever been to China. Finally, number 5, the board of directors has or have decided. Many people said have, and about slightly over half the people said has. This is a very interesting question here, because it could be that the board has decided, in which case there's only one board, and then we will use has. It is also possible it's the directors who decided, in which case we should say have. Both technically make sense. The meaning would still be correct in either case. So we need some other way to figure this out. And fortunately, there is actually a way. There is a rule that will help us identify which of these is the actual subject and which of these is not. So we know that the board could be a subject, or the directors could be the subject. There are 2 nouns. These are actually going to be what's called the noun phrase, which is essentially a collection of words that act as a single noun, as a single subject. So the board of directors is actually a subject. The whole thing's a subject. But where is the main noun? Well, we're going to understand this in just a moment. I have to teach you a rule first. So here is the rule. What we need to understand is not every noun is a subject. We have some nouns that are not subjects. For example, if I say John is reading a book, well, John's a subject. John is reading is a verb, but a book is not a subject. A book is not doing anything. On the same token, if we say the book is being read by John, the book is a subject, is being is a verb, by John, John is not a subject. The John isn't technically doing anything in the sentence. So we have some subjects and we also have some objects. And in that sentence, the book is being read by John. John's actually the object and the book is a subject. I know it's very confusing, but the object isn't necessarily a non-human. The object is simply something, some sort of a person, place, or a thing that doesn't do anything, doesn't perform any action, doesn't have a verb. And for that reason, it really has nothing to agree with. We know the subject must agree with the verb, but the objects don't have a verb. So how could we agree the object with something? There's really nothing for us to agree with. You know, sometimes we can agree them with a pronoun, but certainly not with the verb. So going back to our board of directors, we need to understand, well, which one of these 2 was the subject and which one of these 2 was the object? What was actually doing the action? Sometimes using logic helps. In this case, it doesn't, because either of them could be. So we need a different rule. And that's a rule of prepositions. So just again, to bring you back to elementary school, prepositions are little words that connect nouns. Prepositions would be words such as of, in, for, about, above, beyond, under, over. All of these are prepositions. They usually precede other nouns. They essentially connect nouns together. The board of directors is a prepositional phrase with a preposition of in the middle. And here's what the rule says. The rule says that the preposition will never precede a subject. It always precedes an object. So if you have a board of directors, then the directors would be an object. So what has to be the subject? The board. It's a very useful rule. Sometimes you look at the sentence like, oh my gosh, all of these nouns, how do I actually decide what's a subject and what's not? What I usually do is at first I get rid of all of the nouns that have prepositions in front of them. And usually that helps a lot. Sometimes I can cut down my number of nouns from like 10 to 2. And then I can kind of take a look to see what's doing what, or sometimes I look at whether that's a direct tense sentence or an inverse sentence, and I can see where the subject would be, and that's it. So it's a rule that could be made complicated, but if you know how to deal with it, you will actually grow to like, hopefully, the subject-verb agreement. It's one of the easiest rules to deal with if you learn how to find the subjects and the verbs. So that's a subject-verb agreement rule, one of the fundamental rules of English grammar, and one of the rules that's tested on the GMAT. Another rule that's tested on the GMAT is the rule of pronouns. And I wanted to talk about this because it's actually very similar to the subject-verb agreement, because it also has to do with the agreement. Well, what are the pronouns? These are words such as I, you, he, she, they, it. We use these pronouns because we want to make our language a little more efficient. Instead of saying, Sergey is studying for the GMAT because Sergey wants to go to a business school, because Sergey wants to improve his career, and blah, 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 I can just say he, right, or she, or they, or whatever. By the way, the GMAT does not test your understanding of gender-specific pronouns, so don't worry about that. You'll never be able, or you'll never need to identify whether Jane is a male or a female. It doesn't really matter. They don't do that. They do, however, test the pronouns. And when it comes to the pronouns, there are two very important rules. And the rule is, number one, the pronoun must refer clearly to the noun it's replacing. So when you look at the pronouns, like, yeah, I know exactly what that is. And number two is the pronoun must agree with the noun it's replacing, right? I mean, think about this. We used to have a noun, a proper noun, maybe a name in a sentence. We take it out and we instead put a pronoun. Well, if we do that, we need to make sure we actually put the proper word in the proper place. And it actually matches the proper noun that we used before. So this is just theory. Let me give you an example. Let me give you actually a couple of examples. So here's the first example. Please let me know whether pronoun she is used properly, why yes or why not. Please let me know in the chat box. And in our real class, where we have about 10 to 15 people in the class, everybody was going to be on the webcam, you're all going to have microphones, and or you can come and take our class in person, and then of course we'll be able to interact a lot quicker. Here we have a lot more people. So we have just the chat box, just for now. We also had some people in the distant past that were doing some really strange things, making inappropriate comments. So we want to make sure that everybody feels very safe sharing things. So nobody sees your comments except me. Okay, so some people saying it's correct. Some people are saying it's not. Yeah, one person is saying she's not used properly because we don't know who it refers to. Yeah, I mean, think about this. So Elizabeth is in the hospital. Melissa is not. She's going to the hospital to visit Elizabeth. And one of them's feeling unwell. But who's feeling unwell? I mean, using logic, we can probably say that Elizabeth's feeling unwell because she's in the hospital. We can also say that maybe Elizabeth is a doctor and Melissa is feeling unwell, and that's why she goes to visit Elizabeth. So we don't know who is she. Either of them could be she. That is why this is certainly not a proper sentence. To correct this sentence, we will either get rid of the pronoun So for example, we'll say it's because Elizabeth was feeling unwell, or we'll use a different word such as because the former was feeling unwell. Or we'll change the structure in such a way that either we'll use the pronoun properly or we won't use the pronoun at all. Let me give you another example. Please let me know whether the pronoun is used properly. And I don't mean the first pronoun I, but the other pronoun. Is it used properly? Why yes or why no? Let me know in the chat box. Yay or nay? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Is it used properly? I mean, think about this. Let's think about how we speak every day, right? So we're going to say, look, honey, I'm going to go to Walmart. They have a sale today. I got to buy some stuff, right? That's how we speak. I mean, imagine this. You're telling your significant other, your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your mom or your dad, I'm going to go to Walmart. It has a sale today. They're going to look at you and say, come again? Who's a sale? It has a sale. Who is it? Walmart. Oh, they have a sale today. Yeah. See, we don't really speak that way. But if you think about this, Walmart's the name of a company. And yeah, it's singular. The GMAT sometimes will use the names of the companies in the sentences. And many people just automatically assign they, but it's actually it. So the difference between it and they is actually quite often tested on the GMAT if the pronoun is being tested. You're going to see this. Let me give you another example, or actually a couple of examples. What's the proper way of saying this phrase? Is it you and I or you and me? You certainly, if you listen to popular culture, you will hear both. You know, you and I, Rihanna is singing you and I, or is it you and me? You know, what's right? What do you use in your everyday spoken language? And what's correct in this sentence? Does it even make a difference? Could we use both? Yeah, some of the people are saying you and I, some of the people are saying you and me. Yeah, Lady Gaga, yeah. So what is it? Well, see, the simple answer is that either could be correct in different circumstances. Sometimes it's you and I, sometimes it's you and me. It depends. That's an MBA style answer, right? It depends. But that's going to be your favorite response to any question. Once you do your MBA, it depends. I have my own MBA. That's why for me, it's one of the most common answers. So if you want to understand whether to use you and I or you and me, what we should do is focus not on what's the same, but what's different. If you understand the fundamental rule behind it and understand the difference between the subjective and objective pronouns, then you probably won't have any problem with that. Of course, I is a subjective pronoun and you is an objective pronoun. And here we have a preposition for, that means it's preceding an object. And that's why we need to say you and me. But if you don't remember that complicated rule, it doesn't matter. I mean, we are going to teach you this rule in our class, but there's also a shortcut. And the shortcut is very simple. Focus on what's different, not what's the same. You is the same. So let's ignore the you. The GMAT class is for I, or the GMAT class is for me. What's right? Well, of course, the GMAT class is for me. We're never going to say the GMAT class is for I. That makes no sense. So that tells us that the answer should actually be you and me. And focus on what's different, not what's the same. That's what's going to help you make the decision. The second example asks who or whom is this class for? That's interesting because let me ask you a question. Please let me know in the chat box if you can honestly say that always in your everyday spoken language, you use who versus whom properly. I am not going to put up my hand because I certainly am not the person who is using it properly in my everyday language, even though I do know the rule. Yes, never. Yes, thank you, Maria. Of course. But this is a rule. The rule is whom is an objective pronoun and who is a subjective pronoun. Do we have a subject or do we have an object here? Well, if you understand that we're dealing with an object because this class is, so this is an inverted sentence because this is a question. So we have a verb first, and we have a subject, and we have a preposition at the end. That preposition actually refers to the pronoun at the beginning of the sentence. And because there's a preposition in front of that pronoun, even though it's at the end, we should be using an object. So the answer is whom. Yeah, that's a theory. You might read in some GMAT books, but to me, that sounds a little more complicated. So there's a way to beat this rule. And one of the ways to beat this rule is answer the question. So let's answer this question. Let's answer this question with either they or them. Who is this class for? It's for they. No, that's not right. I'm going to say for them, not for they. And because I said for them, I should use whom. Very simple rule. I just find it fascinating that so quickly we can break this tie. That's what I usually do. If I see who or whom in the answer choices, I'll just simply replace this with they or them. If it's they, it's who. If it's them, it's whom. Piece of cake. So now that you know this rule, you can actually start correcting people's grammar in your everyday conversations, right? Very good way to make new friends, by the way. Anyway, any questions about anything we covered so far? Because I'd like to give you a little challenge. Just again, to keep this interactive, to make sure you can walk away with some practical strategies. I'd like to give you a real question from, again, one of the past exams. This is going to be a sentence correction question. You will see that a part of this sentence is underlined. You will see 5 versions of that underlined part, A, B, C, D, and E. Version A is the same as the original sentence. B, C, D, and E are all different. Your job is within about a minute and a half to pick the sentence that you think is correct out of these 5. So there you go. I'm going to be quiet for about a minute and a half. When you know the answer, please choose it in the poll. So ladies and gentlemen, it's been 2 minutes and I've noticed many people still haven't answered the question, but we do need to keep moving. So let me actually go ahead and end the poll. And just for full transparency, let me share the results with you. As you could see, most people are for E, slightly fewer people for C, and even fewer people for A, nobody for B or D. Could somebody, and somebody for D in the chat box. Can somebody please tell me, why did you pick this answer? Why A or why C or why E? What did you use? What sort of a rule? What sort of an insight? What sort of information in the sentence have you used to actually pick that answer? What helped you pick that answer? Let me know. I'm curious. Okay, a subject-verb agreement. So keep verbs consistent, yeah. Okay. Singular, okay, okay, all right. So thanks for sharing this. Yeah, okay. So versus enough, moving infrequently enough, moving so infrequently. Okay, so there's certainly a few things we can look at here. One of the things that we could look at is the difference between sloths and the sloths. We can also let me know if you can hear me now. Yes, okay, perfect. Small technical difficulty. Okay, awesome. So I can focus on either decision point. I like to focus on something that's a little bit easier. So since we covered the subject-verb agreement and the agreement rule, essentially the 2 agreement rules, I'd like to see if we can figure out whether we should use sloths or the sloths. Sloths refers to multiple animals. The sloth refers to either one animal or the species of the animal. And if we use logic, many people are going to say, well, wait a second, I'm sure there's more than one sloth, right? But the GMAT likes to refer to animals as the species. In fact, I remember one of the questions on the GMAT, which was referring to the North American moose. Somebody please tell me, the North American moose, are they referring to one animal, many animals, or the species? You know, they could refer to any of these because moose is the same in plural and singular. So we need some other way. Well, one of the ways that we could potentially look at is the subject-verb agreement. A, B, and C use plural in the subject. So let's see if the verbs are plural. Can, and use. Yeah, these are also plural. How about D and E? They use singular in the subject, so they should use singular verbs. Hangs and hanks. Yeah, they are also both singular. So looks like the subject-verb agreement isn't something we could use, unfortunately. Well, I really wish there was a pronoun, right? Because we can't really use the subject-verb agreement. So, you know, it'd be nice to have a pronoun, right? And some of you actually noticed, wait, there is a pronoun. And there's actually 2 pronouns there. And the pronouns are after the underlined part. Now, most people, when they read the sentence, they kind of almost ignore the part that's not after the underlined part. They're like, oh, that's not that important, right? But it's still there, so it's still important. And if you look at the end of the sentence, you will see its coat and its toes. Now, not their coats, not their toes, its coat and its toes. So certainly we are referring to just one animal, and that's why A, B, and C are out right away. Interesting. Okay, so now we're down to 2 answer choices, D and E. E certainly was the most popular answer choice. Half of the people here in this class picked E. Nobody actually picked D, except one person then put D in the chat box. So there's a couple of things here we could look at.
one of the things is the difference between so infrequently and infrequently enough. And if you know the difference, you could certainly use that to your advantage. But if you don't know, you could also look at what some of you mentioned as a consistency of verbs, which essentially means we call it the parallel structure rule, where if you have a list, you want to put whatever's in the list in the same grammatical form. For example, you could say, I like to run, to swim, and to bike. You never want to say, I like to run, to swim, and biking. So by this rule, many people are going to look at E and say, I like E, because E says the sloth hangs, sleeps, and moves. Whereas D says hangs, sleeping, and moving. I don't want to say, I like to run, biking, and swimming. So many people automatically are going to pick E. For this to work, however, the structure has to match exactly. It has to be the same grammatical structure. So we should have said the sloth hangs, sleeps, and moves. However, the sentence says the sloth hangs, sleeps, and it moves. That's not the same grammatical structure. We started by listing out the verbs, and then we actually inserted the full clause, the subject and the verb, in the last part. That breaks the parallel structure. That little pronoun spoiled everything with the answer choice E. So this whole sentence was actually about pronouns. If you pay attention to the pronoun it or its, you have no problem picking D as the correct answer to this question. Now, if you know the rule about so versus enough, you could have also used this to your advantage. Most people don't know that, but essentially enough can only be used in a positive context, and so is used in a negative. So infrequently, it's kind of negative. It's so infrequent that even algae grow. So you wouldn't say infrequently enough. You could say rich enough, but you'll say so poor. Again, if you know that, yeah, that would have helped you pick D, but certainly there's a simple rule there as well, the rule of the parallel structure. So ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't pick D, don't worry. It's just some things to learn, but hopefully you can see that if you know what to look for, you certainly could answer this question correctly very quickly. And one thing I wanted you to remember from this exercise is that please, please, please don't choose what sounds right, looks right, or feels right. The GMAT knows what sounds right, and they specifically pick sentences that look good but are not correct. What's really testing sentence correction is the skill number one is attention to detail. They also test your clarity of communication and essentially your mastery of the process. If you know what you're doing in sentence correction, you can answer almost any question in a minute. You just have to be very quick in identifying different parts of the sentence. That's why in a current version of the test, what we teach many of our students in a class is that you could save some time in sentence correction. And you can save this time so that you can gain time to read longer passages in critical reasoning and reading comprehension. And that is certainly going to be very helpful when you start dealing with these longer passages. So if you are planning to take the current version of the test, please take advantage of this opportunity to save some time. Sounds pretty easy, right? Whew, yeah. We have a little button in our classroom, and every time we press it, it says, oh, that was easy. As we get our students to press on that button. Yeah, I wish the whole GMAT were this easy. Yeah, I wish it were. By the way, speaking about this sentence, let me know what you think about this sentence. Is it the proper sentence? Is there any problem with the sentence? Let me know. How does this sentence look to you? Does it look good? Maybe not. Let me know in the chat box. Okay, some people are saying no. What's wrong with this sentence? Why is it not correct? Should have was instead of were, right? Okay, feels right, but maybe not. Or feels wrong, but maybe it is right. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, it's actually correct. Yes, it actually is where is correct. Because this is using what's called the subjunctive mood. We talked so far about the descriptive mood. Most of the sentences in the English are, yes, absolutely, that is a trap. So most of the sentences in the English language are in the descriptive mood, and most of the sentences on the GMAT are in the descriptive mood, but there's a small number of sentences that are written in a subjunctive mood, and that's an example of a subjunctive mood. There are two different usages for the subjunctive mood. We do teach it in our advanced verbal class, but one thing that we need to remember here is that we are dealing with counterfactual situation, essentially something that is not true. And that's why we'll use were instead of was. Let me give you an example. If I were you, I would be taking some notes in this class. Why do we say if I were you and not if I was you? Because I cannot be you. That's impossible. That's counterfactual. So that would be an example. Something like, if I were you, right? We would also say where. If I were you, I would be taking notes. So there would be a conditional phrase. Or something that talks about the wish. For example, if I wish I had $1 billion, or I wish I were a billionaire. Make sense? Okay, this is a bit more advanced, don't worry. But one thing I wanted to mention is that, yes, there are many things to learn. And when you think about learning for the GMAT, I just want to give you a couple of perspectives before we switch gears and talk about critical reasoning. I wanted to show you what the GMAT, the organization that makes the test, shared with us. It's not something you can find online. It's a very interesting graph that essentially talks about the marketing process for the GMAT. And let me know if you're familiar with the concept of a funnel. A sales funnel, essentially, you have a number of people that walk by the store. Some people are going to walk in, and fewer people are going to look at things. Fewer people are going to try things, and even fewer people are going to buy. Right, so that's a funnel. With each successive process, the number of people gets smaller and smaller. So that's essentially a marketing funnel for the GMAT. And the reason why I wanted to share with you is that according to the GMAT, they keep track of the consumer behavior and internet behavior, and they see what people do, and they see what this leads to. So what they recognize is that about close to 10 million people a year worldwide will actually explore the GMAT. They'll be exploring graduate management education. They're going to read an article. They're going to go on a website, and they'll learn more about essentially what is the GMAT. Sometimes they come to an event, they come to an information session. Of these people, about 2 million people will actually create an account and either buy a book or download a practice test or some sort of a free software or sign up for a free trial, free practice test. About 2 million people. So people are getting a bit more serious, right? They actually have an account. They're saying, look, I am actually going to do this. I'm going to begin studying. Of the 2 million people that take some steps to begin studying for the GMAT, guess how many people actually will do the real test? Less than 10%. So approximately 94% of people who are thinking, okay, it would be a good idea to do my GMAT, let me do something for it. They eventually either will get distracted or some other more important things are going to come in the way, or they'll think it's too hard. I don't want to invest my time. So only about 125,000 people as of this year or previous year will actually do the GMAT. It used to be a little bit higher. And of these people, only about 16,000 people will actually get scores of 700 or more. So going forward is going to be a lot smaller, right? So going forward, there'll be like about 1,000 people that will get scores of 700 or more worldwide. So really good opportunity to get a 700 score right now. So the odds, if you and I just wake up one day and go to the gym and wow, it's really good to do an MBA. I want to take my career to the next level. I want to make a lot of money. I want to become a future leader. How many people actually get a score that's good enough to get into a top business school? Only about 1 in 600. That's not a very high chance. But ladies and gentlemen, please don't worry if English is not your first language. Here's an example of Natasha. Her English was her third language. She came to us with a diagnostic score of 580. She ended up with a score of 710 in approximately 2 months. And she got a really nice scholarship to University of Toronto. So this is going to require some effort. It's going to require some practice. So I want to talk a little bit about the process of practicing, and then I'll give you some tips for critical reasoning reading comprehension and talk about the resources a little bit more. The official GMAT guide for the current version of the test is 2022. For the new version of the test, it's 2023, 2024, is one of the best sources of real questions from past exams. If you come and take our class, we also are going to give you a workbook that we'll be using in class that also contains questions from past exams. In addition to that, you're also going to have access to a huge question bank of approximately 7,000 questions. And now you can get access to our question bank even if you don't take a class. So let's say you've taken a class somewhere else, or you're working with a private tutor, you can get access to this question bank that will also contain review videos. It's a very inexpensive way. It goes a lot deeper than some of the other programs like Target Test Prep and Magoosh. It gets much deeper into the strategies and not just to the basic concepts. And you can actually save quite a bit of money if you go to admitmaster.com/offer and type promo code 30OFF. So it will be a lot more affordable than some of the other programs. And again, it is going to go a lot deeper. You could actually try this completely free for a week if you go to admitmaster.com/offer. I'm going to include this in the follow-up email. And if you would like to try this out, I would certainly encourage you to go on our website and try this program completely free and see what you can learn in just 7 days. So ladies and gentlemen, we have about 31 minutes left. So I wanted to talk, give you some tips on critical reasoning, reading comprehension, then talk about the resources and the next steps. So if you could, please stay till the end. There are going to be some important things that I'm going to mention, as well as some very useful strategies that you can take away. So let's talk about critical reasoning. We have started talking about critical reasoning today. Critical reasoning was all about argument. So what's an argument? Have you ever seen people argue? We've seen Jamal and Sasha argue at the beginning of the class today, but often on the GMAT, you will see arguments made by one person. I don't know if you ever tried to argue with yourself. I have to admit, that's a lot of fun. I do this quite often. Essentially, the argument by one person is a series of statements that includes a claim, such as, I'll get a high score on the GMAT, as well as some evidence to support that claim, such as, I will do that because I take my preparation seriously and make the right decisions. That is why I will get a high score on the GMAT. So it's not enough for me in the argument to simply state a claim. I also need to back it up. Make sense? Okay, pretty straightforward. The GMAT will often ask you to break down the argument as well as do something with it. Do something with your analysis. So what I'd like to do is do one more question today. This is going to be another critical reasoning question. I will give you 2 minutes. I will launch a poll, and then we're going to go over this question, talk about reading comprehension, and then talk about the resources. So there you go. You have 2 minutes to answer this question. Please don't Google this question. There is a public question. Please just use a pen and paper and your own reasoning, your brilliant mind to pick the right answer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it has been 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds to pick an answer to this question. And in the meantime, I wanted to answer Miriam's question. So Miriam is based in Cairo and it's 3:30 a.m. right now. So Miriam, we do have 2 versions of the classes. One is offered in the evening around the same time. It's actually from 6 until 10. Right now, the time is 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. We also offer weekend classes, and many of our clients from Africa as well as Europe would join our weekend classes. The weekend classes are offered in the morning on Saturday and Sunday, Eastern Standard Time, and that means it will be afternoon for most of the people in Europe and in Africa. And our next weekend class actually starts this Saturday. So, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll talk about this a little bit in just a few moments. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are a few ways to do this question. I just want to share this with you real quick. Some of the people are going to simply go by what sounds right. So essentially, they're going to read the passage, read the answer choices. It's a bit hard to understand what's going on, and they will just pick what is familiar. We talk about earthquakes, we talk about 365, we talk about Cyprus. So if you go through the answer choices, you would notice that really only B addresses these issues quite clearly. Everything else kind of sounds a little weird. What do coins or statues or inscriptions or drinking vessels have to do with the earthquake? So most people are going to pick B, and they're not really going to be very confident in picking B. Some people are going to learn the rules and they're going to say, well, wait a second. I know it's helpful to read the question first and identify what type of a question is this. This is actually a strengthen question. It's asking me to strengthen the argument. So I need to see not just which answer is relevant, but which answer is actually going to strengthen my conclusion. And then they're going to go through the answer choice and we'll say, okay, so which one's relevant? Which one will actually strengthen that hypothesis that the town was destroyed by this earthquake? A seems irrelevant, before and after, whatever. B gives me more information that this is what happened. Look, a lot of modern histories mention that. So yeah, that strengthens it. This looks good so far. C, D, and E, yeah, I don't know what this have to do with. And many people who learn the rules will confidently pick B and unfortunately still get this wrong. So how would we do this question if we want to get this right, especially quickly? Well, we need to not just learn how to break down the argument, but also learn how to analyze the argument. Essentially, how to find not just what was said, but what was not said. Let's focus on what was said. So what was said is that A, there's debris that point to the fact that this was probably an earthquake. The second thing we know is that there was an earthquake near the island in AD 365. At the very end of the argument, we have words known to have occurred, earthquake known to have occurred near the island. So we kind of know it occurred. Now, the question is, what do we not know yet? Because if we want to strengthen the argument, we have to identify what do we not know. And what we don't know is whether it was that earthquake that destroyed the town or potentially some other earthquake. What we don't know can't go against the evidence provided. So we know there was an earthquake. We know the town was likely destroyed by an earthquake, but we were never given enough information to understand it was that particular earthquake that destroyed the town. It is possible that the town was destroyed either earlier or later, and there was still be debris and there would still be that earthquake that year, but the town was actually destroyed at some other time. It's entirely possible. So what we are going to be looking for is something that will tell us that, yes, it was that earthquake in that particular year that destroyed the town. And if you look through the answers with this filter, you'll recognize that A doesn't really do anything. B gives us a piece of information we already know. So it's a very clever trap by the GMAT. And no, this is not going to be the correct answer because we already know there was an earthquake in AD 365. C tells us that there were a bunch of coins before 365, but no coins afterward. So something happened in 365. We don't know what happened, but probably something big happened, right? Because why else would we have no coins? And that in itself is enough to answer this question. We're being asked to strengthen the argument, not resolve it, not absolutely prove it that this is what happened. Simply make the argument a little more believable. And by a little, I mean, if you believe it by 10%, and with the new answer choice, you believe it by 11%, yeah, that strengthened it, right? So certainly knowing that something big happened in 365 and there was an earthquake and the town was destroyed by an earthquake, yeah, that makes it more likely that the town was destroyed by an earthquake. So we're going to pick C. And at this point, we're going to move on. We are not going to be reading D and E. Here's why. If you read the question, it will say, which one of the following, if true, most strongly supports the archaeologist's hypothesis? If most strongly supports implies that we could have an answer choice that supports it even more. That is actually not true. These words are used on the GMAT for legal protection, just in case somebody decides to turn around and sue the GMAT and say, wait a second, I think there's another answer choice that strengthens it even more. The GMAT can always say, well, no, actually not. This one strengthens it more. So this was originally developed in the GMAT, but the questions are tested so well on the GMAT that this never happens. But this was originally developed many, many years ago. This sort of a phrase was originally developed on the GMAT when it was still pen and paper exam. And because when it was a pen and paper exam, some of the questions were recycled a lot quicker. So the questions weren't necessarily as well tested as they are today. So today you are not going to see any questions where one is supporting it stronger than the other. So once you found the one that supports it, you can just stop and move on. Cool, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed it. And I am quite sure you are very, very excited about reading comprehension, right? We left the best for the last. I mean, who wouldn't love reading comprehension at 8:40 p.m. after 4 days of work, or 3 days if you had Monday or Tuesday as a holiday, if you are in the United States or Canada? Yes, I know. But here's why most of us hate reading comprehension, because very often the passages would be about something we don't understand. So I'd like to give you a new mantra. Stop focusing on what the author is saying, start focusing on how the author is saying it. That's a big difference. That means knowing anything about that subject matter isn't that important. Simply focus on how the passage is structured. Start focusing on the narrative, on the storyline. Become a critic as opposed to passive reader. And if you want the actual steps, then let me show you the actual steps of how you can start reading the passages, how you can start reading for the structure and not for the content. Step number one, as you read the passage, you are going to stop every time the author starts talking about something else or finishes a paragraph. And you're going to ask a question. What was the purpose of whatever I just read? Why was it there? Try to be quite specific, but try to be very brief and write this down. After you finish reading the whole passage, you're essentially going to have some executive summary, some Cole's notes, a very short summary of what this passage was saying. And that's going to be really helpful as you go forward, because this helps you understand the structure of the passage. You're going to also ask yourself a question, what was the passage about? If I were to write a title, what would it be? You're also going to make a note of the author's attitude or emotion behind the words. That is also very important, because there's a type of questions on the GMAT that is asking you to agree or disagree with the author. Well, how can we agree or disagree with the author if we don't know what the author thinks? So that's important as well. And finally, what was the primary purpose of the entire passage? Why did the author write this? What was the reason? Was it to inform us? Was it to argue? Was it to do some analysis? What was it? That's also going to be important. That's going to bring us back to some of these questions where we're going to be asked to agree or disagree with the author. Sometimes, again, we're going to be asked about the overall purpose, so the main concern of the author. So please do take a note. Please take a screenshot. We are going to also send this to you by email. Tomorrow in the follow-up email, you will have these notes. So you can start reading differently, and you'll recognize that you often are going to fall back into the old habits of reading for the content and trying to understand the content. But you need to really train yourself to start reading for the keywords, start reading for the structure. If you come to our class, we're going to do a series of exercises to actually train your mind to read for the structure. And it's going to be very, very useful going forward, because even as a future MBA student and as a future business leader, you will need to learn how to look for things that are more important and not pay attention to too many details that perhaps could be delegated to some other people in your company. So this is going to be a very, very useful skill. Also understanding the bigger picture. If we talked about sentence correction, it was all about attention to detail. Reading comprehension is all about understanding the bigger picture as well. So we'll teach you how to do that as well if you come to our class. Now, speaking about that, let's talk about the resources. Actually, that's why there are different types of shoes and different types of can you still hear me? I think there was a temporary technical problem as well. Yes, can you still hear me? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so there's okay, awesome. So there's certainly different. I'm doing this from home, and sometimes, especially when the weather is really bad, the internet. We have a much better internet at the office where we teach the classes from, but sometimes at home, especially in the evening, it's a little bit crazy. So let's talk about different resources. Let me share with you how my prep worked, and perhaps you can relate to this and maybe use this a bit as a kind of an example of what you could possibly do. So when I needed to do the GMAT, I recognized that, well, this is a test. It's a standardized test, so there's a score from 200 to 800. So the first step that I did was I decided it would be a really good idea to take a practice test. And when I took a practice test, my initial score was 650. So I thought, oh, well, okay, that's not a bad score. It's a nice start. And then I also thought, well, what was I missing? Why did I not get a higher score? And for me, it was just some terminology. I wasn't really familiar because I was educated in a different country. And I wasn't really familiar with like what's an isosceles triangle, things like that. So it took me about a week to review these terms. And a week later, I got a score of 700. And I said, well, that's pretty good. I can go and take my real test. I booked the test. And 2 weeks from when I started to study, I was able to get a score of 750. And I'm sharing this with you not to impress you. It honestly impresses me. I think that's really cool. Here's my official score report. Not to brag, but you could also brag about your GMAT. There's nothing wrong with that. Just also to show you that everything's legit here. But just in case you're wondering that Sergey is some sort of a genius, let me tell you, I am not. I'm just a normal person. I've been very lucky with my teachers who over many years taught me these strategies in school. And I also had some really amazing people I work with here at AdmitMaster who've been GMAT instructors for sometimes longer than me. And of course, I've been a GMAT instructor for a pretty long time right now. So I got really lucky in school. This was my math teacher. He was the best instructor, the best teacher I ever had. He, really taught me how to think differently. He was challenging me, and he really helped me develop these reasoning skills that were super helpful in the future. That's why at some point I had a corporate career, but I decided to leave it and become a GMAT instructor. So I'm officially retired from my corporate job. I love my job. I get to travel. I was in Reston, Virginia. I'm going to New York next week. So if you're going to the MBA tour, we do a lot of work with the GMAT. The organization makes the test. Please come and visit us at the MBA tour. I will send you a link to the MBA tour that you can register. There will be also these events later on in the fall. in other cities, and you can certainly come and visit us. And I love hearing when our clients do really well. This was our client who used to work for a management consulting firm, and he wanted to go to a top MBA program in the United States, one of the top 5 programs. He had the right profile, but not the right GMAT. He was also very busy at work. So he said, look, I really need to know what I'm doing, and I don't have time to fool around. He said, my billable rate at work is like $400. So that's what we charge our clients for them to work with me. So I can't really fool around. I got to be efficient with my work. So even though he worked 60-hour work weeks, he was able to get a score of 740 in just 4 months. So it's certainly possible. So ladies and gentlemen, how can you do this? How can we navigate the GMAT prep? Let me share with you a few different ways that you can approach the GMAT. And let's just talk about this honestly, because for most of you, this is something that you have never done before. This is, you may have done some other tests. Maybe you have some experience with LSAT or SAT. Then that's great. You have a little bit of a preview. The GMAT is a more advanced version of most of these tests. Well, if you compare it with some of the graduate tests like LSAT, there would be some more difficult, some easier things in the GMAT, but certainly compared to some of the more undergraduate tests that most of the people did, this a little bit harder. So when we approach something new, we often don't know where to go, right? So we try different things. Essentially, we go through the trial and error approach, just like Thomas Edison was going through trial and error when he was trying to invent the light bulb. And the trial and error approach is great if we're trying to invent something that has never been done before. But the GMAT has been done many times before, just not by us. So what we usually do is we're creatures of habit. Most of the things we do every day are automatic. They're just our habits, at least 80 to 90%. So when most people think about an exam, the first thing they think about is, what's the textbook for this exam? Because we've been trained over and over and over again in school that we need to use a textbook, read what's in the textbooks, memorize it, then go for the exam, right? With the GMAT being a psychometric test, essentially the books for the GMAT are essentially just question banks. They have a series of questions that give you a preview of what to expect on the GMAT, not necessarily in the same proportion, but they give you enough of a sample of different questions. So these are the 2023, 2024 versions of the book for the GMAT Focus. So they contain fewer questions that are in the 2022 edition. So you certainly don't have to buy these books. You can study with the 2022. And you will still be okay. We still use 2022 because they contain both questions from the new exam and from the old exam. Some people are going to say, okay, well, geez, I mean, if these books don't really teach me how to beat the test, which books will? And then they ask their friends and say, well, what's a good book for the GMAT? Again, because we've been trained, I need a book, I need a book, I need a book, right? And that's why we go and pick up all of these books, read these books. Sometimes they give conflicting information. And what we realize is that actually all of these books are either question banks or they're supplements for GMAT courses. So when you come to our course, we are going to give you our own book that you are going to be using. And if you join our class this Saturday, you may already have this book on your desk. That we probably mailed it to you already. If you come and join us in person, then we're going to give this book to you on Saturday morning. So the books are helpful as long as somebody teaches you how to do the questions. So you need to learn it from somewhere. And instead of a trial and error approach, you need to have a map. You need to have a strategy to your learning. How are you going to identify what you need to work on and how are you going to close the gaps? Now, you could do this on your own. You could come with someone and come on this journey. It's your choice. Either way, you want to have a structure to your studies. Simply doing more practice tests is not going to be enough. So let me give you right now the structure to your studies. Whether you come to a class or you're going to study on your own, let me give you the structure. You're going to thank me later. Here's the structure. Recognizing this is a skills-based exam and not the knowledge-based exam, we need to use a different approach. Reading a book is good, but we need to develop a skill. I'm going to use an analogy of driving a car. Step one, when we need to learn how to drive a car, we've learned some rules. Green means go and red means stop. That's very important. You're not going to be allowed behind the wheel of the car unless you learn the rules. Similar to the GMAT. In fact, before you come to our class, we would recommend that you work on some of the fundamentals. If you're comfortable with the fundamentals, you're certainly welcome to join our class that starts on Saturday, especially if you've been studying a little bit. Or if you have time to catch up on these fundamentals, because we're going to give you lots of things to review before the class next weekend. If you're not comfortable with the fundamentals, if you forgot what's a fraction, how to add them, then I would recommend that you join our class. It starts a little bit later, maybe in August or September. We will give you everything you need to study for the GMAT if you join our class, including these things to review. So you don't have to go and buy any extra textbooks, invest in any additional software. Some of the people saying, well, I'm really bad with fundamentals. I'm going to study a bit on my own, then I'm going to join a class. Well, you can register for our class. You'll get all of these resources right away. You don't even have to pay everything up front if you join our later course. You can just make a deposit to get access to these resources. So that was step one, learning the knowledge. Step two, however, was developing the skill. And what's very important to recognize when we're developing a skill is the first time you do something, you're bound to make mistakes. Just like everybody, every time you do something new, it's guaranteed you're going to make mistakes, right? I used an example recently in one of our seminars. A few years ago, I learned how to sail a boat. It's a little sports boat, about 15 feet, and it's very nimble. So it reacts very quickly, and in a strong wind, if you're doing something that you're not supposed to, you'll be in the water in 2 seconds, maybe half a second, right? So I learned how the wind works. I learned everything about the boat, but then when I got on the boat, guess what? In 5 seconds, I was in the water because I didn't have the skills. So I could just say, oh, sailing's not for me, right? Or I could say, wait a second, I made a mistake. Show me how to do it. So I got on the boat with somebody who's very experienced. Let me see what you do. Then let me try driving the boat myself. And when I'm making mistakes, some small mistakes, you're going to tell me where I'm going wrong, just so I can perfect my skill. And I've been training to sail a boat now for a pretty long time. So now I'm pretty good at sailing, but it took a while. So it's important if you want to master something that you learn these good strategies up front. If I didn't learn these strategies, I just simply went on a boat a few times, I probably would just say, oh, whatever. This doesn't work. I don't know how the boat works, and now sailing is not for me. I can't really sail a boat, or the boat cannot be sailed, right? GMAT's impossible. That's what some people say. So it's very important. And that's why some people ask, well, should I study on my own or should I come to a live class? It's a bit of a preference. You can do either. There are lots of resources available. Sometimes simply making sense of these resources by itself takes all. It's a full-time job, right? There's so many different resources. So sometimes, if I want to fix my car, some simple things I can do myself. But some of the other things, I'm like, I'm not going to go to college for 3 years to fix my engine. I'm just going to go and pay somebody money and they're going to do it. So whatever, change my oil. So sometimes I want to rely on someone else's expertise. So in a live class, the two things are going to happen that are very important. And same things happens with a private tutoring. Private tutoring just tends to be a lot more expensive, a bigger investment for most people. So we really recommend private tutoring if you are very close to your target, especially if you're reaching these higher scores. That's why it's going to be helpful. But a group class is usually very helpful because A, you can ask questions. If something's not clear, you can just raise your hand and just say, look, can you please explain it again? Our classes are fairly small, about 10 to 15 people. In the summer, they tend to be smaller, close to 10 people. It's a bit of a slower season. So now it's a really good time for you to study for the GMAT. You can have a lot more attention in the class, almost like semi-private tutoring. Secondly, we are going to see how you do in class, and we're going to give you proactive feedback. So sometimes, you don't really know where things are going wrong. You're not able to recognize, but a really good instructor is going to look at you and will say, John, here's what you need to do, right? Here's what I noticed. And this is really, really valuable. And I'd really like to encourage you to take advantage of this. By the way, I know many of you came to us through our partnerships with different universities. We do work with many universities in both Canada and the United States, as well as in Europe. So we do have a name in the industry. We've been doing this for a long time. We don't spend millions of dollars in marketing like some of the other companies that will charge you a lot. And then they're going to turn around and spend this money on marketing. We do get quite busy serving universities. We do corporate partnerships as well. But when it comes to education, I'd rather, if I want to cut my hair, I want to go to a good master. I don't necessarily want to go to, the big brand name like First Cuts or whatever. So in education, usually being in a smaller class with an experienced instructor who really cares is what makes a big difference. So step 2 was important, learn your strategy. Step 3 was practice. Practice is going to be important. We are going to give you a lot of homework. The homework is going to be adaptive, which means some of you are going to have easier homework, some of you are going to have harder homework, but homework is really important. You will need to practice outside of a class because I can explain to you how to do the questions until I'm blue in my face. If you don't try yourself, you're simply going to learn, come to the class and pay the money to learn that Sergey can do the questions. And I am sure this is not why you come into the class. You probably have better things to do. So I want to make sure that you will actually succeed in this exam. That's why we will do some exercises in the class to not only show you the strategies, but also teach you how to practice properly so that you can develop some good habits. And this is really important because the exam day is going to be stressful. There's absolutely no question about that. And when people are stressed out, they fall back to old habits. So we want to make sure that you are developing good habits. And you'll be doing this by doing lots of practice. You'll come back. We have office hours every week. We had one today. We have the next one on Monday. So you can ask any question. There's some private coaching included as well. So we do keep track of success of our students. This is how we know that this stuff really works. The skills-based preparation, where you're focusing on really more conceptual understanding, works a lot better than just theory-based learning. And I can very proudly say that the average score of our students is 670. About 35% of our graduates get scores above 700 in the current version of the exam. I'm always laughing when I read online that some of the companies advertise that the average score, one of the companies, I'm not going to say which, but if you go on GMAT Club, you'll probably find them. They claim that the average score of the students is 730. That's impossible, right? And 92% of their candidates get scores above 700. So I don't want to give you false promises, in other words. It is a lot of work, but you can definitely do this. And if you are the kind of person who are very committed, then you can come and join our live class. This is probably going to be one of the best, if not the best classes you have ever taken in your life. You're going to have a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of support. There's going to be challenges. If you love challenges, if you like this class, this is going to be like this class on steroids. So our next class starts this Saturday on July 8th. The following class on evenings is going to start on August 8th. If you are in Africa, Europe, then you might want to consider the weekend class. We are going to have the weekend class in September as well. So usually every 2 months we have a weekend class, and every 2 months we have an evening class. You can think of this as an all-inclusive vacation. You come to our class, we give you everything you need to prepare for up to a year. So you'll have access to our resources, you'll have access to the books, you'll have access to our coaching, office hours. You can come back and retake the classes completely free. So all of this is going to be available, ladies and gentlemen. This is all a part of our all-inclusive program. There are other options available. There are some classes where you're going to be studying a bit more on your own. So they're a lot more affordable. Again, if budget is an issue, we'd recommend our GMAT Express self-prep program. It is very affordable, just a couple of $100, and you can have access to some of the best strategies just without the instructor support. So certainly what I'd like to encourage you to do is come and see us. You can join us at the next MBA tour in New York City. That's going to be next Saturday. I'm personally located in Toronto, Canada, so you can certainly come and visit us as well. But I certainly hope that you take the next steps when it comes to mastering these skills. And please remember that the GMAT or the GMAT preparation journey isn't a thing on its own. You will forget the area of a trapezoid, but you will remember how to make decisions under pressure with incomplete information. And that's going to be really helpful. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you're very excited about taking your career to the next level. So let me know, what is it you want to do? I want to keep you accountable a little bit. So if you say, look, I'd love to chat, then absolutely no obligation. I'm not even sure that our class is right for you. But if you'd love to chat, just let me know in a poll. I'll reach out to you tomorrow by email. We can have a nice leisurely chat and share your resume with me. I've been in this industry for a very long time. Like I said, we work with pretty much every business school in Canada, many top business schools in the United States and Europe. We work with the GMAT a lot, with different organizations as well. So I'm just fortunate that I've been doing this for so long that I can hopefully give you some good insights. And very often when I do one-on-one consultations, I'm going to hear, wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Thanks for telling me. I'm going to consider this. So I can't make decisions for you. That's your life. That's your future. That's your investment. But I certainly can hopefully help you understand what is available, what are some of the options for your MBA, for your master's, what programs might be the right fit for you, and potentially how can you get there with what different things. Sometimes you will need the GMAT, sometimes you'll need the GRE, sometimes you won't need either. Again, that will all depend, so I can help you understand that as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that takes us to the end of our class. I appreciate you coming here tonight. I certainly enjoyed teaching this class. I know I'm going to see some of you on Saturday. I see a few people here on the list that are going to be joining us on Saturday. So this was a bit of an introduction of what is coming your way on Saturday. Please make sure that you have a nice, healthy breakfast. If you are taking this in the morning on the Eastern time, I know we have some people joining our class on Saturday from the West Coast. So it's going to be 7 a.m. for you. Some of the people are joining us from Europe. So it's going to be the afternoon. Make sure you don't fall asleep after a very big lunch. We do have a lot to cover this Saturday. It's going to be a 4-hour class from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. If you'd like to chat a little bit more, you could just send me an email. I'm going to also post. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for your comments. I'm glad that you enjoyed this. Let me post the link where you can find what we talked about today. If you go to this page, you can see some samples of what our self-prep classes look like. I would like to encourage you, if you are considering studying on your own, we have an option to try our self-prep program for 7 days completely free. It's called GMAT Express. If you click to try now, you can just activate your access for 7 days. There's no credit card needed. You just put your information, you get a link in the email and you activate it, and away you go. You can try this completely free for 7 days. You can learn a few strategies already. You can take a few modules, take a practice test. So it's a really good way to get introduced to the GMAT. If you'd like to talk on a little more personal level about specifically what, again, might be the right fit for you, let me know. We have different people working for Admit Master. I'm just a pretty face. That's why I'm doing this seminar. Kind of. But we do have instructors that are really, really talented. We also have a pretty significant team of admissions consultants that used to work at different business schools. We have people who used to work for top schools in the United States, top schools in Canada, top schools in Europe, that can help you navigate this whole process, make the right decision. Again, we provide a lot of support to our students at no extra cost because you are becoming a part of our network. We also have some additional services, like we can help you develop your essays, help you prepare for the interview. We have a lot of people going to top schools in the UK. We have somebody just graduated from Oxford. We have a few students who are going to INSEAD starting this September, starting in January. So we certainly have a lot of expertise in school admissions as well. And if you get a good score, which is certainly our goal as well, is to help you get a good score, then we'd love for you to come and chat a little bit more about how you can put this score to a very good use. We're going to give you some tips and strategies. And if you'd like, we can also help you with the whole application process. If not, that's okay as well. We still want you to make sure that you can really take advantage of these high GMAT scores that you're going to be able to achieve. Ladies and gentlemen, when you close this seminar, there's going to be a very quick survey that's going to ask you, what do you particularly like about this class? Is there anything that you wish that we covered the next time? We do read all of these comments. Please, 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 please let us know if there's anything you want us to cover, maybe in greater detail next time. We used to do these classes for 3 hours. We shortened them to 2. I know we have a lot of Zoom fatigue. So we've gone to just a little bit over 2 hours. I'd like to encourage you to keep this conversation going, reach out, take a practice test, join our next class, sign up for a one-on-one consultation, reach out to schools, talk to other people, make sure that you do your research. And again, if you're just at the beginning of the journey, I'm happy to help you with at least understanding what's the main framework to making decisions. I personally worked with over 20,000 people over my 14-year career. Many of them I trained for the GMAT. Some of them I just consulted and coached and gave advice. So I certainly also have a very big network, not just among schools, but also among the clients. And I can share with you my opinion. And you could use this as one person's opinion, and hopefully it's going to be helpful. And you can use this again to help you take your career to the next level. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very passionate about this work because A, I work with a lot of smart people. B, I love my work because I find the GMAT as an exam a very fascinating exam. Sometimes I just do the GMAT questions for fun. And number 3, I do really believe that our world needs better leaders. I mean, look at what's been happening in the world. Right? There's just crazy, crazy things, right? I originally was born in Ukraine, and if you've been following what's going on, it's just crazy, crazy. I'm not going to get into politics, but we need better leaders, and the business schools, good business schools, train good business leaders. So I'm hoping that through the work that we do here at AdmitMaster, we help people become future leaders. We had a student recently from Montreal came to us at the beginning of the pandemic. She was working for one of the not-for-profit organizations in Montreal, but she wanted to make a bigger difference in the world. And unfortunately for her, she had a lot of anxiety around the GMAT because she tried to study for the GMAT with books for about 4 years. She was almost ready to give up. And then when the pandemic started, she was laid off. Then a friend said, why don't you come and take this course? I know you've been trying to do the MBA. It's probably just, your kind of last attempt. So just go and do it. And she called us up. I connected with her. We developed a study plan for her. We do this for every one of our students. Is we work to develop a very personal study plan for you. So for her, we had to overcome this anxiety as well. So she did a few exercises. We did some workshops as well around that time, just at the start of the pandemic. We wanted to support our students. It was really difficult for everyone. So we had a psychologist come in and do some free workshops and some very, very cheap, inexpensive workshops, like $10, $20, where you can learn different ways to structure your studies, cope with different life situations. So we always try to support our students as much as possible. So what this person did is she followed the program. She was able to get the 700 score in just 3 months. She gained admission at the Oxford MBA. We helped her structure her application as well because she was able to get her GMAT done in just 3 months as opposed to what she originally planned would take her at least a year or two. She started her MBA earlier. She graduated last year, and she works for the United Nations. So she did a few really cool projects in the Middle East. So I'm certainly very proud of people like her. We have another student who also really struggled with the GMAT, had some really amazing recommendations, worked for the provincial government. And when he went for the MBA program, he wanted to go back and work for either work for the government or maybe work in the private sector. But instead, he actually founded a startup, which is really, really cool startup that connects people together and provides this mentoring opportunities. It's just really cool. I think that he's already made a lot of difference in the people's life. And I always, feel humble, but also proud and kind of remind myself of the work that we do, that it's really something that hopefully makes the world a better place by helping people achieve their true potential. So I'm certainly hoping that you are also going to pursue your dreams. This is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And if this class was a bit of a maybe nudge to don't give up your dreams, then certainly my job here has been done, and it was the time well spent here this afternoon. So thanks again, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to speaking with some of you soon. Good luck on your GMAT, good luck on your application, and please keep in touch. Do you have any other questions before I let you go? All right, take care, all the best, and I will see you soon. And please keep an eye on the follow-up email tomorrow. I will include some of the notes from this seminar today with you so that you can refer back to them. I'll include some of the additional resources, the free practice test, and some of the other things as well. Perfect. Thank you so much, Mariam. And since you are in Africa, for you, or in Egypt, for you, it might be worthwhile to consider a weekend course that is going to be within a reasonable time for you. So maybe let's get in touch as soon as possible and see what would work for you. Take care and all the best. Thank you.